Hi, everyone. So we are going to begin panel 2. We're going to begin panel 2. So our moderator for this panel is Dr. Tunde Adegbola, who is a researcher in human language technology. He works in adapting ICTs to make them usable in African languages. He partnered with Microsoft to localize Microsoft Windows and Office to Hausa, Igbo, and Yoruba, the 3 most widely spoken Nigerian languages, beginning with Windows Vista. From Windows 8, the languages became bundled with the operating system. He teaches artificial intelligence as an adjunct in the University of Lagos, University of Ibadan, and Adegbola University, all in Nigeria. So we want to welcome Dr. Adegbola to moderate this next panel, and I will put his bio in the chat as well for those that would like to read it.
Thank you very much, Amma. Good evening, everybody. It's with a great joy that I accepted to moderate this panel on algorithmic systems and African languages as part of the Digital Humanities program. The whole idea of digital humanities is one that I find really intriguing and exciting because from the core of my scholarship is based on the fact that every technology that we develop anywhere in the world is answer to a question raised by culture. And each time that technology, by virtue of its capacity for alienation, manifests in alienating us culturally, we have to depend on the humanities to solve whatever problems that technology creates. So from these 2 points of view, we find that technology is totally helmed in by issues that surround the humanities. So it's with great joy, therefore, that I welcome this evening Salomey Ossei, who is going to talk on natural language processing for Nigerian languages, Ife Adebara on the challenges of natural language processing technologies for African languages, Wuraola Oyewusi, we'll be talking about scaling digital technologies in African languages, insight from teaching Yoruba online, and David Adelani, who will be speaking on a few thousand translations go a long way, leveraging pre-trained models for African languages. Without much ado, let me invite Salomey Ossei to give us her insights. We've got here 1, 2, 3, 4 speakers, and we have barely an hour. So if you wouldn't mind, if each speaker will make their presentation in about 10 minutes so that we have some time to have some questions. So Salomey, can you start now? 10 minutes, please. Thank you, Salomey.
Hello, thank you for the floor. I will be talking about our group called Ghana NLP. I'd like to share my screen now. So I hope you can see my screen.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. So, hi everyone, my name is Salomey Ossei. I am from Ghana. I am a PhD student at the University of DeustoTech, and I am currently working on automated machine learning. Today's talk, I will be talking about Khaya AI, and I theme my topic NLP for Ghanaian languages. And this is by a group called Ghana NLP. So in today's talk, I will mention why African NLP and specifically Ghanaian languages. And then I will talk about Ghana NLP and other communities that have the same impacts as us. And then the inspiration behind our Khaya app and how it works and the next steps for the group and for Khaya as well. So about 7,000 languages exist in the world. And out of these languages, we have about 2,000 African languages. But African languages are still underrepresented for reasons best known to people who work in NLP. But what I would like to mention is that the focus has mainly been on languages such as English. And it is so disheartening that even as at now, we don't have a common language as Africans to be able to communicate. If I were to go into any African country, I would probably use French, English, or whatever language there is. But it is good to point out that if we had a common language for Africans spoken by Africans, it would bring togetherness amongst we the Africans and also make us understand and give us a better sense of the world that we live in the African context. Some of the communities similar to Ghana NLP that has been helping bring the African languages on the map of NLP are Masakhane, Sisonke, and Data Science Africa. There are more, but of course, these are some highlights that I bring. So let's talk about Ghana NLP. We are an open source initiative and we focus on NLP for Ghanaian languages and we apply it to local problems. Although recently we've been going beyond our bounds to include other African languages. And then we seek to develop state-of-the-art NLP technologies for these Ghanaian languages that we have, and then also contribute to the state-of-the-art. We would also like to build translation applications such as Google Translate for Chi, Ewe, and the different African Ghanaian languages that we have. The inspiration behind Khaya is the name we got from the mahogany tree, which is called Khaya. And just like the tree, we aim to be a sustaining resource for Africans in the digital future. And as we all know, the mahogany tree is also a word called home in the several parts of the Southern Africa. So our inspiration basically surrounds bringing digital future to Ghanaian languages. I will talk about Khaya. So Khaya is a translation app which has recently included speech recognition. And what Khaya does is from time to time learn from users and then we implement these feedbacks into the system. So we have new training data coming in. We have special analysts from the team, volunteers who analyze this data. We now fine-tune our model and then deploy. So once deployation has been done, it is tested by the user who download these applications. And then we take the corrections that the users have given, and then we put it back as new training data. So for some of the things that has been done by Khaya, we've trained it on parallel data. In the translation app, we have languages like Chi, Ewe, and Ga. And then in the automatic speech recognition, we have Chi and Yoruba as well. Also, this is a picture of how the translation goes. So for example, the Khaya AI can ask the speakers of different languages to communicate right here. And then the languages that it currently handles are displayed. For example, here we ask Khaya what to sing, which means how are you? So this is actually a great translation, not direct, but this is the best translation you can find for the want to sing. So we measure these scores and present these scores that we've had with Khaya, and we see that the scores are very good. As you can see, from Tree to English, and from Dagbani to English, from Yoruba, and from Ewe to English, and vice versa, the blue score looks really great. And then the changes that have been made with the input of the user also depicts how great the model Khaya is doing at the moment. Like I said, the new version of Khaya includes an automatic speech recognition, and we recently added Dagbani and Tree, and we improved on the Yoruba. And significantly, we have improvements, and for user feedback, we have like 40,000 to 50,000 across all the platforms. Also, the metric for the ASR that we build looks very promising and still takes feedback from the user to incorporate it back into the model. Our next steps for Ghana NLP as a team and for the Khaya application specifically is to include more languages across Africa, keep listening to users, and enhance parallel training. And then we would incorporate all of these feedback back into the system to be able to improve on the Khaya application. As a group, other works that we have done comprises of contextual word embeddings for Chi. In that we have our Abena, which is a model that is fine-tuned on an Akan corpora. We have Bako, which is also another bet, but only on Akan knowledge. And you can find both Abena and Bako on Hugging Face. We also have an English to Tree parallel corpus that can be used by others for research and for other purposes. And currently, we're working on language detection and to release an API for Khaya and several other projects that are not mentioned in the slide. Thank you so much. And if you would like to join our group, you can email us here, or you can just type Ghana NLP. Our website is there, and follow our work. Please download the application on Android and iOS. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Salomey. That was spot on time. Thank you very much. Now I will call on the next speaker, who is Ife Adebara. Ife, please, another 10 minutes, so that after we have the 4 speakers, we can then entertain questions. Other participants, please note your questions. You can put them on the chat area. I believe there's somebody coordinating this. So please, if Adebara, please go on. I hope you're unmuted.
Yeah, so can you hear me and can you see me? Hello?
Hi, we can hear
Yes,
and
we
see
can
you.
hear
Yeah,
you.
go ahead.
Okay, so good afternoon, good evening, everybody. So my name is Ife Adebara, and I'll be talking on towards Afrocentric NLP, where I'll be talking about some of the challenges to developing NLP for Africa. This work was done in collaboration with my supervisor, Professor Mohamed Abdul-Majid, and some of what I'm talking about today was presented at the ACL 2022. I will, in the course of this talk, I'll be talking about the motivation for writing this paper and picking this topic, and a number of important themes, including typology of African languages. I'll talk about the literacy situation in Africa. I'll talk about current problems with the approaches, and then I'll do some talk on the data quality issues and the current ecosystem. I will be covering approximately 94 languages spoken in Africa across 6 the language families, including Niger-Congo, Afro-Asiatic, Nilo-Saharan, Creole, Indo-European, Austronesian. And on my right is a map showing the languages and where they're spoken in Africa. So one of the objectives of doing this work is to motivate and advocate for Afrocentric approaches to African languages. It is important to mention that each culture is naturally best expressed using the language in which it evolved, which encodes knowledge about people, their traditions, their wisdom, environment, and how they interact with some of the concepts that belong to their culture. And modern NLP technologies have been developed in Western societies, which adopt Western-centric approaches, and unfortunately, some of those approaches are not well suited for African languages. So as a result, it's necessary to motivate and advocate for Afrocentric approaches to African language NLP. Typology of African languages are quite different from Indo-European languages, which have been the main languages used for NLP so far. And knowledge of typology of African languages can be very useful in determining which languages might be treated together, for example, in multilingual models, and which methods are best suited for a language-specific task. So for example, if a particular method works well for a language, if a language is with a similar typology uses that same method, you can assume that it's going to work well. So those are some of the reasons why it's important to look at the typological features of African languages. And one major typological feature of Africa is tone. Approximately 80% of African languages are tone languages. So on my screen, you will see a map, which is highlighted in purple ink. That area is Africa. And the red colored areas have tone languages, and the yellow colored areas have tonal accent languages. So they're a kind of simple tone system. And if you compare the area in Africa to the rest of the world, you will see that tone is majorly domiciled in Africa. And because of this, we need to pay attention to the tones of African languages when we're building NLP systems for African languages. The kinds of tone patterns that we see in Africa are also quite complex. If you look at this table, if you look at the right, we have the function. So the tones can be lexical, grammatical, and even there's some languages that have both lexical and grammatical tones in them. When we talk about the orthographic representation of these tones, sometimes they are not marked, and some other times they are marked. And in cases where they are marked, you could have a deep or shallow marking. So when we're talking about a deep marking, the same word will have the same tone marks in every context. But there are some languages that have a shallow marking where the tone, where the tone marks differ depending on the phonological context of the words that surround the word that carries the tones. And apart from this, there's also exhaustive or partial tone marking. So exhaustive means that every tone bearing unit carries a tone mark, and a partial tone marking might be where some tone bearing units carry some marks. So for example, for lexical tone is the difference between Igba basket, Igba 200, Igba time, Igba garden egg, and Igba rope. And grammatical tone is what's responsible for the difference between Ama sleeps here and Am I sleeping here. When we talk about partial tone marking, you look at Yoruba, which has high and low tones marked, but leaves the mid-tone unmarked. And exhaustive tone marking, you have an example like Shank, where every tone bearing unit is marked. Now, the recommendation is this: we need to investigate how tone interacts with system performance. So if we look at this machine translation example on the screen, where we've shown like the blue scores, when you have no tone marked and tone marked settings, you'll see that for Bambara to English, the difference between the tone marked and no tone marked settings are quite negligible. But when you remove the tone marks for Yoruba, you see significant deterioration in performance. So while you would have up to like 38 blue score for Yoruba to English, you have about 12.76 in the no tone mark settings. And so we need to really understand how is the best way to represent the tones for African languages. Which languages should we keep the tones and which ones should we remove? And which ones do we really need to invest considerable amount of time into developing a tone pattern that would work for these languages. There's several other typological features which I mentioned in the paper. You can look at the paper to get more ideas. Now, the next issue with NLP for Africa is the issue of literacy. So Africa has about 2,000 languages, and more than, which is about a third of all the languages in the world, making African languages truly multilingual. So it's not uncommon for a child to be exposed to multiple indigenous languages before reaching school age. So once a child reaches school age, formal education, which is the sole way people become literate, is exclusively in a foreign language or in a combination of a foreign and indigenous language. And so most people have no literacy in indigenous languages and only get literacy in foreign languages. As a result, even countries where African languages have any official status only pay lip service to these policies. Lack of trained personnel and adequate educational resources in indigenous languages, as well as a rarity of teachers sufficiently proficient to teach indigenous languages, make even the implementation of indigenous languages in many African countries difficult to implement. So as a result, most indigenous languages are rarely used only at home and prohibited in public domains. If you look at the map on the right, you see that the majority of languages spoken in Africa are foreign languages. So you have English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Arabic, and then you see a couple of other indigenous languages spoken in Africa. The effect of these language policies is very visible on the data availability for African languages. About 542 languages have been referred to as left behind, and that it's probably impossible to build resources for them. 26 languages are scraping bys, which means that there are only unlabeled data sets and no labeled data available for them. Only about 9 languages are hopefuls in that they have few labeled data sets, researchers and language support systems, while only 1 has a strong web presence, but still has insufficient labeled data for NLP work. This is quite sad, particularly because there's several millions of speakers of indigenous languages in Africa, and we just do not have data for them. So one crucial thing we need to do if we're going to build NLP for Africa is we need to pay attention to the literacy in indigenous languages, because without literacy in African languages, there is no flourishing future for African NLP. And literacy takes time. Policies that teach indigenous languages for brief periods in elementary schools need to be reformed. And African languages need to be used as official languages in the countries where they are domiciled. And the reason this is important is because, for instance, we're not going to go to Iran to retrieve English data because we have Farsi and Arabic as the languages mainly spoken there. And so in the same vein, we wouldn't get enough indigenous African language data from Africa if African languages are not official languages in those countries, and if Africans are not literate in their own languages. So this is one key factor we need to really pay attention to, because the current trend is for private individuals and small organizations to come together and try to build resources for African languages. The problem with that kind of approach is that would have a lot of historical data than data that really caters to the way languages are used. And finally, I'll just mention a new tool that was just developed, which I'll be presenting at the EMNLP 2022. where we have 517 African languages and dialects in a single system, a single language identification system. And this is one solution to being able to at least collect data from the web when you're able to identify these languages. And yeah, so I'll round up by acknowledging the support of my supervisor and also the mentorship of Dr. Adegbola, which has shaped my ideas over the years, and these organizations for sponsoring my research. And please follow me on Twitter. I'll be sharing a lot of tools that I've been building over the past few months. Thank you. Eshigoni.
Thank you very much, Ife. We'll be raising questions later on. Now, I would like to call Wuraola Oyewusi, who will be talking of scaling digital technologies in African languages, insights from teaching Yoruba on social media. Wura, you have the floor. 10 minutes, as usual. Thank you very much, Wura.
Okay, good morning, good evening, everyone. Ife, hi. Thank you, everyone. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can see your screen. Yes.
Okay, it's supposed to be the big one now. Okay, hello, everyone. It's nice to be here. Thank you, Dr. James, for the invite, and thank you, sir, Dr. Adegbola. Okay, so I'll be talking about scaling digital technologies in African languages, and the specific insight I'll be sharing is from my experience of teaching tech topics in Yoruba on social media. Some of the most important questions I've gotten is under 4 headings, and then the first one is this relevant? People want to know if whatever I'm teaching, is it useful? The second one is it possible? Like, can you do this? What are the words for the technical terms? Why are you even doing this? I get a lot of messages on social media. Why are you doing this? The third one, the people who you think you're teaching, do you think they are curious enough to be part of this? And the fourth one is distribution. Is this scalable? So we're going to explore a data-driven data approach. I'll be sharing data from my work, and I hope it's interesting to you too. The first caveat I'm going to share is that the data I'll be sharing in this presentation is personal data from teaching tech concepts in Yoruba. And the 3 key distribution channels that I use is LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. It's important that I mention this because my experience could be different. Let's say maybe I'm distributing on Facebook or maybe on TikTok too. But let's just say these are the platforms that I have the range for right now. Okay, so at the 2-month mark, as I had thought about 12 topics in tech concepts in Yoruba. I had talked about, I think, what is data science, what is artificial intelligence, what is machine learning, digital learning. Why should you be part of digital learning? I think I taught cybersecurity here, I'm not sure. And the numbers from YouTube was maybe about 21,000 views, about 1,007 subscribers, and about 15 likes. I'm mentioning this because it's not like I was actively looking for these people. I don't really have the energy to engage a lot of people. And then on Twitter, almost 1 million impressions, about 182K views, and many likes. And then LinkedIn. LinkedIn was particularly interesting because I remember when I shared quite a number of people sent me messages. Why are you sharing Yoruba on LinkedIn? The people here only want to speak English, and then we don't think this is the right platform. But data disagrees. So in case you're curious, I understand that there are different African languages that has been spoken, but I only have data with Yoruba. And this is data from the first 90 days. This data that I'm sharing is YouTube, because YouTube was the platform that gave granular data. And I wanted to share that with you, maybe because I'm a data scientist and, it's something maybe I'll be curious about. So the top viewers are from about 17 countries, the people watching on YouTube. And then we have Nigeria, United States, United Kingdom, Canada, UAE, Germany, South Africa, Ghana, Malaysia, France, Ireland, Italy, India, Qatar, Finland, Australia, and the Netherlands. And what's interesting about the geography data, the people watching from Netherlands are not a lot, but they had the longest attention span on the video. If you look at this place, average view time for whoever or the people watching from Netherlands is 6 minutes, 42 seconds, while the next set of people watching from Ireland, there are not as many as Nigerians. They are watching for about 2 minutes, 55 seconds. And then obviously this could probably mean something like, okay, whoever is watching from those places in the world, they really have interest in whatever the content is in Yoruba, and they are watching. So so about the age band, for YouTube provides data on about 6 age bands, 19 to 24, 25 to 34, 35 to 44, 45 to 54, 55 to 64. Within the first 90 months on YouTube, like I said, I don't have data for other platform. The people watching the most are between 25 and 34 on YouTube. And then people between 18 and 24, they're only about 6.4% of the viewers. Maybe they're on TikTok, I'm just, let's say you're designing for how this will scale. Maybe this can be useful in your work. Maybe YouTube is not their channel, or maybe it's not just been targeted. I'm not doing any adverts or doing any form of promotion. It's just organic. And then people between 25 and 34 are watching on YouTube. If they are showing their kids, people between 25 and 34, 25 and 44, we belong to a similar generation. Maybe it's more relatable. Maybe they are watching with their kids. I don't know, but people are learning about tech in Yoruba, and this is what the data looks like. And YouTube view duration, even though people who are 65 and above, according to YouTube's estimation, they are only 2.5% of the viewers. They have a higher average view. So older people who are curious, older people, they may be retired, and then quite a number of people have shared with their parents, and then they share feedback that, oh, I think my mom now understands what I do in tech. So it could be this demographic, these two, but they are watching for longer. Okay, so why are people learning? There's an interesting perspective that is weird. It's weird because there's an interesting perspective that people who don't speak English or maybe the major languages are not curious. That's a lie, because technology is already in their lives, and it's one of those things that they are curious. They want to know how it works. They want to know what it's like. People ask a lot of questions. Why? Oh, this is why recommender systems work like this. They ask those questions because it's already in their lives. Number two, another reason I think people are watching is it's demystified. Personally, I don't like things being seemingly complex. You may need to put in the time. You may need to work hard. You may need to study. But personally, I don't just like people making it seem as if it's impossible and difficult. And from some of the feedback, now people say, oh, that's cloud computing. I've been using Google Drive. Oh, I have an idea of what it means, and it's pretty nice. The third thing is entertainment. quite a number of perspectives when people are sharing about digital learning, digital tools, is as if people are not being entertained, but that's a lie. For example, when I taught recommender systems, quite a number of people were able to relate to the Yoruba movies that they were watching. Oh, this is why it brings me those kind of movies too, if I have watched this. So people do want to be entertained. People who speak English well, they also want to learn new concepts. They also want to they also want to have conversations related to Yoruba. And then number four, language learning and development. There are old concepts and then there are new concepts. People want to learn what this word means because if a language will survive, it has to evolve. It has to be part of those conversations. It has to, for example, when some people say, "Oh, that's not the word," quite a number of people, even if they don't speak English, it's not like they call shop on their streets. It's not like they usually call it letaja. You know, they will probably just call it shop or shobo or kind of a thing. And again, yeah, so it's something quite interesting for me because I speak Yoruba a lot. That's literally what I speak most times if I don't have to not share. And it's been a pleasant experience. It's taken a lot of time and but it's been a pleasure to share about tech, seemingly techish things. It's been a pleasure to share it in the language that people understand, and the engagement has been interesting. And yes, people do want to learn seemingly tech concepts in local languages. If you want to give that a shot, you should totally do it. Okay, that'll be all.
Thank you very much, Wuraola. That was very good. Spot on time. Thank you. Now we'll be going to the next speaker, who is David Adelani, and David will be talking about a few thousand translations go a long way, leveraging pre-trained models for African languages. David, you have the floor. Please go ahead.
Okay. Sorry, looks like I cannot share my screen, but just a bit.
Can the admin?
No, I think it's not from there. It is from my side. Okay, so let me just rejoin.
And while David is setting up, if folks have any questions, please feel free to begin putting them in the chat box so that we can go through them during the Q&A.
Okay.
Recording in progress.
How are we doing, David? Yeah, we can see your screen now, David.
All right, so welcome to my talk. So just sorry for what happened with the network issues setting up. So today I will talk about a few thousand translations go a long way. And the whole purpose of this talk is to tell you how we can build machine translation ourselves for our domain of interest. So if you're working on digital humanities, you are working on creative blocks, or working on some legal text, or working on some medical domain, how can you quickly adapt existing pre-trained models to your domain of interest? So I think previously what people do is that you have to train data on very large models. And what companies try to do is to build a single model. Like Facebook, they have a single model called NNLB. Microsoft has Z code. It's a single model that outperforms several bilingual models. So if I want to develop a model to translate from English to Yoruba, I'm going to just train based on parallel data from English to Yoruba. But if I want to do from English to Zulu, I have to train a new model. So what tech companies like Google would do is to just bring all the languages together, make use of parallel data set and monolingual data set, and try to build a single machine translation model. So, but when trying to build this, they also try to collect a lot of data from the web. But most of this data actually excludes many African languages because they are absent. So what we are asking is, does it mean there's no hope for these languages without that presence on the web? So in this work, our objective is to see how we can adapt some of these publicly available pre-trained models. It's something that one can easily do, even with without deep knowledge of machine learning. So you can pick your favorite model. It could be an Hugging Face. And how can you adapt it slowly to a new language or to a new domain? But while trying to answer this question, we are faced with another challenge, which is lack of evaluation data set for African languages. So our contribution is to first create this data set that doesn't exist for a new domain. And then we try to adapt these pre-trained models, one that has been trained on other tasks like MT5, BT5, or one that has been trained on the machine translation task for other languages, except the languages that you're interested in. Maybe you want to just translate from French to Fula. How can you use this pre-trained model? So we are trying to see how we can incorporate larger out-of-domain corpus, for example, from the religious domain, because most of the time it's relatively available in most of these languages. Okay, so because of my time, I'll focus on the dataset creation and just say a few points on the experiment. So for the dataset collection, we call the dataset Masakhane, Anglo and Franco African News Dataset for Machine Translation. So because we're focusing on the news domain, for some relatively high resource languages in Africa, like Hausa, Igbo, Swahili, Yoruba, and Zulu, because many researchers are working on this, there exist some data set. But for some other African languages, especially those ones spoken in the Francophone part of Africa, we do not have these data sets. So we try to create for Bambara, spoken in Mali, for Gomola, spoken in Cameroon, Ewe, spoken in Togo, Fon, spoken in Benin, Mosi, spoken in Burkina Faso, and Wolo, spoken in Senegal, and also Anglophone countries like Luganda, Luo, Nigerian Pidgin, Setswana, and Swi. So we did focus on different language families like Hausa from Afro-Asiatic, Luo from Nilo-Saharan, and Indo-European, Creole, English Creole, Nigerian Pidgin. The remaining languages are from the Niger Congo, which is also the largest in Africa. So from this map, you can see that there's a lot of concentration of languages in West Africa. We also have a few ones from East Africa and southern part of Africa, Setswana and East Zulu. So we also have Gomola in the part of Africa. So for the existing corpus, most of the existing corpus are in the religious domain, JW 300 or the Bible. So what we did is that we asked native speakers of this language to give us like local newspapers that we can translate from. For example, in Nigeria, we translated from Daily Trust, Nigerian Pidgin, and for Igbo, they translated from, I think, Punch newspaper and BBC Yoruba. So these are recommendations of native speakers. And based on this, we translated a few thousand examples from the title. most of the time like from 2,000 to 10,000 sentences. And we want to see how we can create a powerful machine translation model. So the advantage of this is that an individual, even a single translator, can come up with a data set of 2,000 translations and use it to adapt this model to a new domain, maybe legal text or medical domain or any other domain of interest. So this is the experiment side. So we have some, we try to adapt models by training the languages together. That's the many-to-many translation. Or we use what's called continuous pre-training. That means you pick the original pre-trained model and you train it further on African language text. So we adapt it from a model that has been trained on over 100 languages, and we adapt it to 17 African languages to cover more African languages before training a machine translation system. And the second thing, if you want to adapt to a new domain, one idea is to just start with all the out of domain corpus you have, for example, in the religious domain, then you can combine it with small in-domain corpus. In our case, the news corpus. And here you could combine them together, or you first train on the religious domain, then you fine-tune on the news domain. And the last one is that you first train on the religious plus the news domain, then you additionally fine-tune, on the news domain. So our results shows that if you use this pre-trained model, you can easily adapt and perform very well on machine translation. So if you pick the original pre-trained model, the performance is very bad. But after the adaptation, you can see
to interrupt you, but
for blue score, the higher the better. And if you have a blue score of 10 plus, then it's already good. Then the translation is understandable. And you can say for most languages, after we use pre-trained models, on few thousand translation, we already have very high blue scores. That means our adaptation works. And with additional pre-training, we could even have further improvement. So, and if you use a pre-trained model that has already been trained on machine translation task, you can have better performance. That's why we have M2 M100 giving the best performance. So I'm going to just highlight something on this slide. Here, if you combine all the religious domain you have, all the available corpus in this language you have, it's difficult to actually do significantly better than the original baseline. So the original baseline is just training on few thousand translations, going back to the title. So that means we try to put the power in the hands of linguists or not in the hands of tech companies. Because tech companies, they always try to collect large amount of data. Well, as a translator or people with small budgets, they can actually create very good models with this. And this will help in many digital activities. Okay, so, and
I'm going to have to stop you now, David. Please, can you just
we're trying to do domain adaptation from religious domain to news domain. The light blue is if you train on religious domain and evaluate on religious domain. And the solid blue is that if you train on religious domain and evaluate on the news domain. And you can see that the domain, this is a big domain difference. So lastly, you can see an example here that if you train your model based on religious domain, because of the domain mismatch, you find some biblical terms being used in the translation, like scroll or in the head. But if you use our model just using few thousand translation, like 4,000 sentences, you can actually improve the performance and you have more realistic words that are used. So instead of scroll, we have book. Instead of in the head, we have in the word. So in conclusion, we have created MT, a purpose of 16 African languages to study translation system for low resource the languages in the news domain. And we also come up with ways to adapt large pre-trained models to new domains or to new languages. And our findings shows that even with 2,000 sentences that can be easily created by a single translator, we can actually adapt these models to new domains of interest. So this paves way for others to create new translation systems, so without depending on big tech companies to create translation systems. I hope this is helpful for people working on digital humanities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. I'm very sorry I had to hound you. I wanted to create some time for some quality questions. Thank you. These are really impressive projects, and it's really gratifying to know that this width and depth of work is going on in NLP for African languages. Now we'll go into the time of questions, answers. We have barely 12 minutes to go to stop this session. So what I'll advise is whoever is handling the question, can you please read out the questions all while each of the presenters note which questions apply to them, and I'll call each of the presenters to quickly address those questions in as short a time as possible as they can. So can we have the questions? Is somebody collating the questions?
Hi, so right now we're waiting for questions to come in. So if any folks have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat so that we can read them out loud for the panelists.
Okay,
but Dr. Oh,
yeah,
yep, go ahead.
While we wait, I just wanted to ask from David. I noticed that there was no input for Yoruba from Benin Republic and Togo for French, because I know Yoruba is actively spoken in these two countries. So can you please just note and address that when you have a chance to respond to the questions? Salomey, the work you described, is it being done in Ghana or outside Ghana? That I'm curious. And impressive work, I must say.
Well,
no, when it's your turn, your turn, yeah. I'm just actually buying time to get questions coming. And Wuraola, thank you very much again for your work. Yeah, I don't think I have any question for you. Ife, yes, thank you for the work. But my question though to Ife is, do you actually regard the absence of tone mark in the mid-tone for Yoruba a non-marking or a marking by default? You may respond to the question when you have a chance. Any questions from the...
So maybe we might have the panelists answer the questions that you just posed.
Can we start from David?
Oh, we have one more question that just came in. It's for
Okay.
Efe. And it's just an additional one on top of what Prof asked earlier. Could you explain further on how tone language can create problems with translations?
Okay, so we'll start from David to Wuraola to Ife, and Ife to Salomey, in that order, please. David.
Yeah, so thank you very much for the question. Yes, truly, Yoruba is spoken in Benin Republic and Togo, and even across West Africa, even in Cote d'Ivoire. So our purpose of using English is just because we are constrained by the evaluation data set we have. And the evaluation data set was created from English. So also, that's why we use that. So of course, if we have a more inclusive benchmark like Flores, we could even try different direction from French to Yoruba, from English to Yoruba, and actually check the difference. But that's a very good point. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Wuraola?
You're muted.
No questions, Wuraola, but do you have any comments?
There's no question for me, but about people in Yoruba speaking people outside Nigeria. Quite a number of people have reached out to me from Togo. You know, that's one of the things that social media does well. You know, quite a number of people, they say hello from those spaces. Obviously, I know I'm not speaking the type of Yoruba that they do, but they seem to have an understanding, and it's pretty nice. But that's teaching tech in Yoruba on social media.
Thank you. Ife, you are muted.
Okay, yeah. So I would say regarding the mid-tone in Yoruba, I would say that it's unmarked, but it's unambiguous because across all Yoruba writings, the unmarked tones is usually the mid-tone. But in certain other languages where some sounds are unmarked, it might be ambiguous if the unmarked sounds can have different tones. But for Yoruba, it's not ambiguous. So for the second question, where they're asking about the problems tone language can create for transitions. And I'll say the major problem is ambiguity. So when tones are not are removed, you would have significant amount of ambiguity. So I give examples with lexical and grammatical tones, as well as languages that have both. So imagine where you have lexical tone that is supposed to give you the difference between like maybe 5 different words and the tones are missing, then the system is forced to think about what that particular word will be in the context. And sometimes the context is not enough to disambiguate the true intent of the speaker or the writer in those contexts. So those are some of the problems, because when you're doing a machine translation, you want to reduce the ambiguity as much as possible in a way that the machine translation system is able to come up with the best or the highest probability, which would also be the correct transition for each word or sentence, as the case may be. So those are just some of the challenges. And then another challenge with tone languages, depending on the kind of orthography that is used. I talked about deep and shallow orthographic markings. So in a case where you have shallow orthography, where the tone marks change depending on the phonological context of the language, then you'll be looking at data sparsity, because there'll be less examples for different tone mark patterns. And when you're now talking about a low resource language, that is significantly introducing more complexity into a model that sees less examples for the particular tone patterns and less examples for the language generally. So those are some of the challenges with tone languages for machine translation and for many other NLP tasks. Yeah.
Thank you. Salomey.
So you asked a question about whether this is being done in Ghana. Yes. So what happened is that we started Ghana NLP when most of us were in Ghana and some are abroad. But as time went on, people traveled to do their PhDs, their masters. So currently we are all over the world, but we still meet just like the Masakhane online, have meetings, define our projects, and then work together.
Wonderful, wonderful. Is by any chance, is there any other question on the chat space?
If
Well,
I would answer the question that was in the chat from Cassidy Goring.
Okay, we have another 4 minutes to spare. If any of the speakers have any closing thoughts, it will be most welcome. Please go ahead. Anybody that has any closing thoughts?
I don't have a closing thought, but I have a question for Ife. She presented very briefly a new work on LID for African languages. So I just wanted to ask, you're able to cover like 500 languages. What is the data? What kind of data do you use to train them? I mean, because 500 is really impressive.
Yeah, so I was able to cover 517 languages and dialects, and collected data from Bibles, different religious sources, crawled newspapers from different African languages. There are loads of domains that were used to build this tool. I'll be sharing the paper in a few days, as well as the tool, so people can use and evaluate as well.
Okay, great work.
Thank you.
Wonderful, Ife. That's really impressive.
Thank you.
Any
Sir.
other questions from any other speakers? Well, if there are no questions, I will just want to thank all of the speakers, and let me, on a personal note, express my joy at moderating this panel. because for me, it has been a lifelong career and a lifelong quest to have young Africans engaging African languages with vigor from a technology point of view. And one thing I have found, and I believe that we as Africans should try to work around and make proper, is the fact that in my traveling around the world, I have met people working in speech technologies who do not understand what a phoneme is. They just take the data and slap mathematics onto it, and it works. But you find that in that kind of atmosphere, there are loopholes. Some things get through the sieve. So as we continue to grow, I want to encourage more and more linguists to come to the fold. And I want to encourage more and more computer scientists, engineers, mathematicians, generally technical people to reach into the subject of linguistics and get to understand what goes on in linguistics. I had this same problem when I started looking at the whole problem of human language technology some 40 odd years ago. I was brought up in an atmosphere that looked at linguistics as a subject in the humanities and which I, as an engineer, was not concerned about. And I was struggling trying to understand what really is the acoustic correlate of tone. And it was a casual discussion with a linguistics student that said, of course, tone is determined by the F naught. And I said, what's the F naught? And I had to read. So what I'm saying in essence is that as we go on in this journey, let us join hands, people from the technical subjects, people from the humanities, and let's join hands, let's rub minds, let us synergize so that for us in Africa, where we have a little bit of disadvantage in this area, we can actually use that synergy to make, to plug the loopholes in our situations. Once again, let me thank all the panelists and thank the participants for their questions and for listening. I wish all of you a good evening for the rest of the day. For us here, for whom it is evening, and for those of you for whom it is something else, I wish you a good day. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that amazing moderation. It was great. Thank you for also curating the dialogue afterwards. And thank you to our panelists for, honestly, I found it to be really, really exciting and really amazing work. So thank you so much for doing this work and for sharing it with us. So we are going to move into our closing dialogue. It is between Jennifer Hart and Kuukuwa Manful, and the title of their dialogue is Digital Humanities and the Recovery of the African Past. I'll briefly say their bios. Jennifer Hart is an associate professor of history and affiliate faculty in anthropology and entrepreneurship and innovation at Wayne State University. Her research explores the history of mobility, infrastructure, technology, and space in Ghana, West Africa. Her first book, Ghana on the Go, African Mobility in the Age of Motor Transportation, published by Indiana University Press in 2016, was a finalist for the African Studies Book Prize. She directs the public digital history project Wuraola and writes frequently for public audiences in a range of venues, including the Washington Post, Africa's a Country, The Conversation, and Nursing Clio. And Kuukuwa Manful is a trained architect and researcher who creates, studies, and documents architecture in Africa. She is a visiting postdoctoral scholar at the Center for Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences at the University of Stanford, and a postdoctoral researcher on the African State Architecture Project at SOAS, University of London. Through her Accra Archive project, she has digitized a collection of endangered historical architectural material pertaining to architecture, construction, and urban regulation in Ghana. She also curates Adansesem, an architecture collective that documents Ghanaian architecture theory, research, and practice, and co-founded and runs SocioArchi, a social architectural enterprise that advocates for and provides architectural services to people who ordinarily can't afford architects. Her PhD research at SOAS, University of London, examines nation building, social class, and modernities through analysis of the social, political, and physical architectures of secondary schools in Ghana. She holds master's and bachelor's of science in architecture degrees from Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, and a master's of science in African studies from the University of Oxford. So we can just give a round of applause and prepare ourselves for this final dialogue from these two really brilliant scholars.
But they do like us to ask you to check out, but if that's yours, then you already did that. So.
Hi, everybody. Glad to be here.
Hi. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Kuukuwa.
Hi. Nice to see you again.
You too.
Yeah, I just want to shout out Amma for like pronouncing Adansesem correctly. Anytime someone's introducing, they're like, yeah. So it was just like surprising and also very warming to hear it said as Adansesem, which is the correct way.
Exactly. So I don't know, James, did you have an agenda for this conversation? Or do you want us to just go? Or Amma, either way.
I think that, oh, James is on. James, you're muted.
So I sent an email out earlier. Sorry, multiple screens. So Kuukuwa knows exactly the direction in which this is going. You probably, I mean, the email probably just missed you by Jen. But the idea is just to wrap up everything. We've had a brilliant, keynote, 2 wonderful panels from the way I see things. I know people are tired, but I just thought it would be great to listen to 2 DH-focused panels, 2 DH-focused speakers who can speak to the African past using their own projects to highlight things and just conclude things as so that people can just go. I mean, this is like around 9 o'clock in Germany. I know that people are from all over the world and we don't want to keep people much longer.
Exactly. Well, I'll let Kuukuwa take the lead then.
Okay. Yeah, I thought we could just keep it very light and casual and talk about our projects around like digital humanities. So I can go first. So Jennifer has a chance to gather her thoughts. So my most recent project, which is called Accra Archive Project, was funded through a grant from the British Library. So I came across, while doing my Master of Architecture research, I came across this collection. You can't really call it an archive. It was really like a room with documents, with an old man with a cat in charge of them. And I found it because I was talking to all these old draftsmen who had been practicing in Accra in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, asking them how they got their training, how they got into this job, because they were not in the formalized training system through the university, the School of Architecture. So it was one of these random conversations somewhere in some corner over Kinky or beans or something, where one of them is like, oh, so I have this friend who works at AMA and he's in charge. AMA is the Accra Metropolitan Assembly, and he's in charge of this room, which has like drawings from like when the white men were here. So I probably in a very silly way, dangerous way, just like, okay, yeah, take me there. Then I follow these guys and then go into this room, which is like in a really terrible state. It's near if anybody knows Accra, it's near the lighthouse. And it's in this terrible state and has these documents, which I'm like, what I can touch and see, dusty, moldy, everything, but it has these building permits submitted to the Accra Metropolitan Assembly literally from when it was instituted, and it started requiring people in the city to obtain permits. So looking at this, I just felt like it was an important resource to preserve in some way, to make accessible. And that's how I got to apply for this grant to digitize this collection, just to make it accessible for scholars, but also I was thinking of like myself as a young architecture student, knowing about this material, because how we're trained in architecture in Ghana, we just assume, or we're taught with the assumption that architecture starts when Europeans come to Ghana, and the kind of the first names we hear are like European masters, and then the next set is kind of Ghanaians or Africans returning from schooling in Europe and coming to practice. But I'm looking at these documents, and there's something from 1898, from 1904, and I'm seeing clearly a name like Corte, right? So that's another story here. So that's how I come to this archive and work on this project to digitize it. But while doing this digitization project, I was trying to think of other ways to engage, again, the young hypothetical architecture students, and not just the scholars in this project, like people in the community and people who might not know that they have an interest in this kind of material. But this is how we're using digital technologies and social media to reach out to these communities, but also to go really to some of these houses that we found and say, hey, look, we found your building plan from 1934. This is, do you recognize this name? And they're like, oh yeah, that's my grandfather. And they take us around the house, and we'll just have these beautiful conversations around the buildings and the relations to the buildings, so which made it like a really beautiful resource. Another thing that I did was also to get current architecture students, Ghanaian architecture students based in Ghana and also in other countries, to kind of commune in a weird way. We're in October, spooky season, so commune kind of with the ghost of these draftsmen and architects who design these buildings by redrawing, by doing digital models of these buildings, like kind of like through drawing, getting to know the details, the design choices, and understanding these buildings and sites. And then we had an exhibition of this kind of communion between young architecture students and these dearly departed architects and draftsmen. So yeah, happy to answer other questions later, but I'll just give the floor to Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I always love hearing about your project and all the great ways that you engage the public. And I think it sets a helpful foundation for me. I was thinking about this and kind of what I might say over the last week or so, or several weeks. And, you know, in particular, because Wuraola just launched on Monday. And it's yay, after 6 years of 6 long years of development, or 7 really. You know, and you know, the point of the project, and one of the things that I'm really proud of is that like you, in many ways, the project came from the community and was about serving the community. It wasn't a purely scholarly project. It was really a form of public engagement. It was a project that people asked me to do. I wasn't a digital humanities person when I went and did my dissertation research in 2011. You know, people just over and over and over again, and not academics, right? I mean, some academics, but really, you know, a lot of other people, drivers and passengers, were saying, you know, please, you know, can you create a map of the Trotro system? And other people were doing this at the time, and it was just really decontextualized. And there's some really important projects out there that are doing that work, and we get something out of all those projects, right? But it wasn't necessarily what I felt would best represent Trotros, because what was so interesting about Trotros is that, and these are like public, like buses, right? Public transit, informal, quote unquote. I hate that phrase, but public transit, paratransit in Accra. And what was so interesting about them, in contrast to Matatus, for example, in the digital Matatus project, is that they had very long histories. and had always been controlled by African entrepreneurs, and really were largely, you know, small owner operator. There weren't these big cartels like you see in Kenya of vehicle owners. They really were, you know, pretty small owner operators. And so they really did tell very individual stories of the drivers and their families and their histories. But it was also, you know, what was so vibrant to me, and one of the things that I felt like I could never, either because I didn't have the skill or because the medium doesn't allow it, could never capture in Ghana on the Go or any kind of, you know, academic or even non-academic writing that I would do, is the life of the street, the energy of the street. And it became clear as I was talking to people that a lot of other people felt that way too. Drivers felt that they weren't understood, that people didn't know their story. You know, as and platforms were developed like Trotro Diaries that were dedicated to giving passengers an opportunity to share their complaints and their frustrations and their stories, but drivers weren't getting a place to do that necessarily. And you know, but there was also a whole bunch of other stuff that was going on in Accra that was interesting and very different than what appeared on Google Maps. You know, if you look at Google Maps and what gets mapped in the city, it really is predominantly elite spaces, and for all sorts of reasons, right? And there's a big focus on the road, and not all roads, and you know, so some of them get left off. And also the names of the roads don't necessarily, they might fit the official or formal name of the road, but that's not what people call them. And so, you know, a lot of the ways that people navigate the city are not necessarily by these like landmark elite spaces or by postal addresses or by the names of roads, but it's like by Trotro stops, or by old landmarks that are attached to Trotro stops, like Kingsway, which is my favorite example, which no longer exists and hasn't since I think the 80s. But still has a Trotro stop named after it as a kind of commemoration of that old Kingsway department store that was so important in the kind of life of the city, and for a very long time. And so, you know, I think Akrawala was really about trying to capture some of that. So doing, you know, a lot of what drivers had asked me to do in creating this map. But also then taking it a little bit of a step further and giving people the opportunity to tell their stories. What was it like to live in Accra? You know, and that can include researchers. So all of my research materials will go up there to make them more publicly available. And I hope that any other researcher who works in Accra and has material will be willing to put their interviews and you know, archival documents and, you know, whatever else they have up there to make them accessible to the public, or do it in some other way. It doesn't have to be on Akrawala, but I do hope that they make them available, because it's so important to return that information to the community and make it accessible. And we don't have enough platforms for that in a way that are open. You know, we might put them in archives and they get locked behind a door. So, you know, I think that ultimately that'll be up there. The archive is and the map is ultimately publicly generated though, and so it does rely on people to engage with it. And so similar to you, I'm thinking a lot about how to engage people in kind of the project, and how they might be able to use it for their own purposes. So I've talked to writers, for example, who are interested in telling, you know, literary stories through the map, spatially embedded literary stories. I've talked to artists who are interested in kind of spatially located art, putting that on in the archive. You know, fashion folks who are interested in connecting in that way, right? Architects and musicians who want to, you know, take songs that mention different places and plot them on the map. So anything that's spatially related, and there's been a lot of enthusiasm over that, and I appreciate that. But one of the things that was most gratifying was when I showed it to the Law Drivers Union, who are it's the oldest union of drivers in the city, and they were the original drivers in Ghana, really, and really extraordinary people. And they you know, I showed like a preview of the site to them, and they were so excited and said, you know, we're going to be able to use this to make arguments for ourselves when we have to talk to ministers, when we have, you know, when people tell us that, you know, or say that our work doesn't matter, or, you know, tell lies about, you know, what what our work is, then we'll have evidence, right? And we'll be able to show them and say, no, this is who we are, this is what we do. Because a lot of those ministers don't know, have never ridden in a trotro in their life, and have never been to a lorry park. And you know, so that was really important to them. And I was so happy to see that they saw themselves in the project, and saw that it could be something that was useful to them, that I hadn't gone too off the rails and made it too academic, or gotten too creative with it. So, you know, that's really important. I think, you know, not being physically in Ghana all the time makes that a challenge. And so that's the beauty of social media, and being able to connect with people in part. But you know, it is a challenge. And so it's going to require ongoing effort. And it's not something that's a flash in the pan. It's, you know, it's not going to happen in a year. We're not going to have a perfect, beautiful archive immediately. I know that your project has taken, you know, it's been a process to digitize all those records too. So yeah, needless to say, right? So, you know, I think that's really important. And this stuff does take time. And so it's a commitment. And I think, you know, to do it well, it's a commitment, and requires a real investment in community that I think is really important.
Yeah, thanks. So I just had this question as such. I really like that you said this thing about Kinsway still being called Kinsway, even though, like, I mean, if you ask a kid there what's Kinsway, yeah, they'll look at you like what are you talking about? But yeah, and I one thing I really enjoy about your work and how you write is how you trace these kind of like urban shifts, like through the histories of the work, the histories in the work that you do. I wondered if you'd like to speak a bit to us, and I know this is more of your last project. It is linked to this one, but it's more of Ghana on the Go. But yeah, like what do you see in terms of shifts and continuities between some of these early the early churches owned by these market women to like what the system is now?
Yeah, I mean, it connects to a book I'm working on now too, and I think Wuraola is a helpful link between the two for me, kind of intellectually. But you know, I think one of the important things that all this kind of work highlights is that the way that things happen in the present, we make all sorts of assumptions about the way things are in the present, and assume that it's always been that way, that that's a natural state of things. And you know, if somebody or some system is you know, disrespected or not in good condition, there must be a reason, or they've always been that way, or they're just not you know, they're just not good at things. And that's not the case. And I think, you know, that's one of the great things about history, is that it, you know, when we bother to look, it normally tells us that things have changed over time. There's a lot of continuities, but there's a lot of changes as well. And that those changes in the case of driving and of lots of parts of Accra's history, you know, that has been the result of very intentional choices that were made by government officials in various moments, but also just shifting economic fortunes and circumstances and in the country writ large, in terms of access, as well as the position of the country in the global economy, and all kinds of meta things that are really consequential, but aren't necessarily something that any individual does. And you know, I think so, you know, there's moments in the 60s and 70s and 80s where trotro drivers get criminalized in various ways and scapegoated among other people, like market women, for continuing to make profits in the midst of general economic suffering. And that becomes an issue. They're criminalized in earlier moments too, as kind of pirates, mobile pirates that are undermining government order. But I think that, similar things happen in other spheres, and for traders, for people who are building housing, and kind of styles of housing, right? We know like the compound house, for example, and various things about intramural burial and all that kind of stuff gets banned, right? And criminalized in various moments, and or delegitimized in various moments. And it's making a comeback now a bit, but at least the compound house. But there's all these things happen, and they do have a history, and the way we are now is not for nothing, and it was choices that were made by people. And I think that's one of the things that makes history so rich. And I think one of the things that I hope by kind of embedding this historical documentation in space, we'll be able to see it in a new way, and see some new kinds of connections that we might not have realized before.
So this is connected to what I'm working on now, like for my postdoc project, which I'm calling this concept of unformalization, because so these archives that I've digitized are clearly a record of formalizing of the built environment in Ghana, the Gold Coast then. But as I would go through them, I noticed like there's something else happening. So it's not that they're formalizing a system and introducing like a foreign system, a colonial system, but they are also eroding and diminishing an existing system, which then the category of informal doesn't do it for me. It's because informal is kind of like it's a byproduct of it. But this is like, I'm kind of theorizing it as a deliberate and intentional process of kind of stripping away the value, stripping away, just the values and attached to these technologies and systems of building. So I'm also wondering if this is some of what happens with the chochos, right? Even though they are new because they come with the advent of the car, so we can't really call them indigenous the same way, but to some extent they are, because they've always been there. But is this thing of, but what's weird about it is that there's not really a formal system that any government is trying to put in place. There's not actually a solution that they're trying to make. They're just saying that these chochos do not fit into their vision of of modernity or whatever, but without having an option for so many people who depend on it. And just as an aside, like I think if anyone ever made a mistake and like put me in charge of making decisions in Ghana, I would insist that any person who works in policy or lawmaking or anything has to only use public transport. I think like so many of the problems that we have would just be solved by an MP being in the queue for 3 hours to get to work.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, right? So like you have kind of an opposite situation where you have young people working with really old documents. And I wondered, like, what are their reactions that they have as they're kind of digitizing these documents, right? What are the kinds of conversations that they have, or things that they notice or mention?
They crack me up. So they have so that we have a range. So we have like current students, and then we have some kind of recent, within 5 years, graduates from architecture school. So one of the ones that really cracks me up is how they're like, because the earlier documents are very rudimentary, like pretty much an outline with a label that says new house. And you can see that the thing is getting professionalized as you go over the years, because then they start doing these really elaborate detailed drawings. At first they don't sign, but then they start to sign up and put their names, and then you see they put a designation, they even have a registration number. So like they make comments about how, oh my God, like why did people complicate this so much? You mean like if I were in architecture school in 1900, I could just draw an outline of the box and say, this is my house, and this would be all of it. But there's this like real sense of like of awe when you're like going through and just like almost seeing, well, not in real time, but seeing this profession develop and how we get there. And then when they engage with some of the details, like this comment you made about people assuming certain things are just the way they are, they just come from nowhere, but like just seeing like, okay, when did septic tank details become like become a sort of requirements for architectural drawings? Like then we had an intern who was a civil structural engineering student, which was also interesting because he was just surprised about how, well, he was surprised, but then it made sense about how he said they were over designed. There was like too much concrete, too many iron rods, because now they wouldn't design like that. But then it also makes sense because these buildings are sturdier and look sturdier and last longer than buildings that would be designed now. So it's also really, yeah, it's also a great experience, like kind of seeing these documents through their eyes with their training now. And just like them having these light bulb moments of where certain things come from, or how things were not, or how things were.
Yeah. What do you think the digital kind of components adding to the way that people are going to engage with these documents? So I mean, there's the preservation part, right? Because, and I know the AMA archives writ large are in pretty horrific state, but there's lots of really interesting things there. So there's a bigger digitization effort that needs to happen, but you know, you're starting on these really important documents, and so there's the preservation of them. But you know, what else do you feel like is gonna come out of the digitization?
Something that's already coming out, and I hope will be more of, is just like people from other fields or like art and things just engaging with this material in ways that I like frankly did not expect. So yeah, we had an intern who wanted to like explore their spoken word through that, and like, to be honest, like I'm not sure what's happening, but I really enjoy it. And so just like people engaging with it and like owning this thing that's their history, and it being just like so easy to access. So another thing I did with the website for the project was to just feature people who use archives in their work. And one of my favorites was someone who uses like archival photos for kind of 3D fashion modeling. So she just, she reimagines like fashion in the past, but then she reimagines it with models that are not conventional models. So like plus size women. And it's just like this like kind of like thing that you don't expect, but like so like brilliant and so beautiful coming out from engaging with these archival documents and images, and also like reproductions of life at this time.
Yeah. That's super interesting.
I wonder if we should probably have people ask questions. So
yeah, James saying we have about 2 minutes.
Oh yeah.
But okay. I wanted to say, like, you know, I mean, I think that's so important because I mean, multiple times people have asked me, I think people have an image of digital humanities as having like a clear research question and then an answer. And that is a form of digital humanities, right? But there's also the kind of digital humanities that is about kind of facilitating a conversation and a collection, and then seeing what people do with it. And making it available to the public and allowing the public to direct the research questions. And so really you're creating a platform rather than creating a project or you know, a kind of research project or research agenda. And I think that makes people uncomfortable sometimes. And I understand that because it is a different way to think about scholarship, but it's really important and can you know, free up people to do all these interesting things that you might never have imagined otherwise, and using materials in ways that you just never dreamed of. Yeah, James, are we supposed to have questions or are we finishing up?
I guess we should be wrapping up things.
Fair enough.
Yeah, although I don't know if people have questions. maybe one or two before we go. We actually have about 3 minutes. It's actually been a very patient audience we've had all day, all morning over there in Lawrence. So I think we should just draw the curtain on this. This has been really exciting, very informative for me. I've learned a lot. So I would like to thank Dr. Ropika Risam, who has left us, obviously, and thank Amabima for moderating this so very excellently. Thank you to Brian and other colleagues at KU who have helped to put this together. My departmental chair has been on the course since morning. So thank you, Sean, for being here. Thank you, everyone, for all the contributions, just by way of attending, by way of speaking. Thank you to Jennifer and Kuukuwa for closing us very excellently. Yet I think they deserve a round of applause. So I'll just say before we go that the video recordings hopefully would be available sometime next week. And you can also get on our website, which I guess I could put in the chat, to get further information on other events and programs that are focused on African DH. And I just leave it at that. So thank you, everyone. Hope to see you some other time.
Thank you, James. And thank you for all the work that you do to bring these communities together and facilitate these conversations. It's so important.
Thanks, Jen.